One of the positions that I've been accumulating over the past month is BMNR. It's now 5% of my total portfolio, and there's many reasons why I'm accumulating it. I feel the need to make videos on a weekly basis around BMNR because there's just so much news that's going on. This week, we had news around Tom Lee going on ARK Invest podcast talking about BMNR and Ethereum in general. We had Michael Saylor talking about Tom Lee and Ethereum, and we have so much news around adoption, around the ecosystem benefits of Ethereum in general, and around BMNR as a company itself. And in this video, I want to cover all the major news pieces around Ethereum and BMNR that I've seen this week. It's going to be a big thread. So let's jump right in. So you might have been noticing a lot of BMNR content from me lately, and the reason why is because it's what I'm most excited about right now. And as a result of that, it's what I'm closely tracking. BMNR has been down over the past week. It's trading at about $50 per share right now as of this recording, down about 9%. Over the past month, it's down about 18%. It obviously went as high as $63 before giving up those gains and back down to $15 per share. So this is one of the names that's been beaten down a little bit by the market. And I think a lot of that has to do with the macro. And because it's a treasury company, much of it has to do with the crypto ecosystem in general and where the underlying Ethereum is. I made this post a couple of days ago and I said, look, there's so much BMNR news that I see every single day that I almost feel compelled to make a video on this thing every 4 days. And that's really what I've been doing over the past several weeks without really realizing it. And I want to formalize that in weeks where I see a lot of BMNR content. I want to be talking about that actively and sharing my thoughts around the main pieces of news. So this video, I've broken out all of the pieces of news that I've seen about BMNR this week, and I've broken them out into 4 categories: the funds accumulating, the ecosystem benefits, the adoption in general, and BMNR specific news. So let's start with some of the funds. I saw this news. This was earlier today. The founder of Huobi, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, one of Asia's largest exchanges, is launching a $1 billion treasury firm to accumulate Ethereum. In other words, they want to have a regulated vehicle focused on Ether accumulation, or in plain English, an Ethereum treasury company. So we're going to have a new $1 billion Ethereum treasury company. And keep in mind that BMNR is kind of an outlier because it is the world's biggest Ethereum treasury company, but there's a lot of Ethereum treasury companies out there that are much smaller. With the $1 billion Ethereum treasury company, they would climb to the number 4 spot in the leaderboard in terms of the size. And this user says, a reminder that 6 months ago, most people were still judging ETH as a commodity for Ethereum usage. Today, companies, financial institutions, and governments want to hold ETH as a store of value. It is now Bitcoin and Ether. It's still early in the game, but we've come a long way and the future is bright. So you're seeing more institutional money flowing into Ethereum. And regardless of this, from a retail sentiment perspective, the adoption is barely scratching the surface. Here you can see the market cap of crypto has just exceeded a record $4 trillion, yet 75% of investors have zero exposure to crypto right now. That's including Bitcoin, of course. We're still early. This is a post 2 days ago from Kalshi, just looking at the Google Trends of the search term buy Bitcoin. And they've not reached the highs that we saw back in 2017 when we had a massive bull run, and also in 2021 when we had a massive bull run, which really begs the question of how far along are we in this bull run? Of course, we've seen the value of Bitcoin exceed past $100,000 per coin and even go as high as $125,000 per coin. But normally, when you see the peak of the market, you see this massive retail euphoria, which would correlate with Google Trends being at their highest level, which is what you're seeing right now with gold. And I don't necessarily agree with what's going on with gold. You're seeing lines around the block for people to buy gold. And I just think that that blind euphoria is going to leave a lot of bag holders. So we'll see how that one plays out. But if we look at crypto, we're not really seeing that search volume. But what we are seeing is we're seeing a ton of inflows on Ethereum ETFs. We're seeing a ton of inflows from institutional companies, and we're seeing a ton of companies build up their treasury. This is the corporate Ethereum adoption for Q3 of 2025. And you can see the total Ethereum holdings here, 4.63 million. $19 billion is the total value of Ethereum holdings, and that's split amongst 27 public companies holding Ethereum. Now, this is not necessarily like the Walmarts of the world that are holding Ethereum. This is predominantly Ethereum treasury companies. So you can see the top 5 here are bitmine, SharpLink, which is SBET, Coinbase, BitDigital, others. corporations have added over 4 million Ethereum in Q3, and bitmine, BMNR, is the second largest digital asset treasury after Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy or Strategy, which is the largest Bitcoin treasury company in the world. And if you look at the monthly Ethereum holdings, you're seeing a massive explosion in the amount of purchases of Ethereum. Fidelity clients bought $155 million worth of Ethereum. This was 2 days ago. And you're seeing Larry Fink, BlackRock CEO, come out on CNBC saying, we're very early because tokenization of all assets will drive even deeper adoption. And this is very bullish because Ethereum is going to be the ecosystem that this is all going to happen in. We've seen Vlad Tenev talk about this, Larry Fink in this clip. It might take some time to play out, but it is bullish for Ethereum because it's going to be the ecosystem of choice for tokenization when this does happen. Let's play this clip and give it a listen.
I do believe we're just at the beginning of the tokenization of all assets, from real estate to equities to bonds across the board.
It's very loud here.
It's very loud.
But it's good. Capital's at work. You like that.
I love capital at work.
Yeah.
But there's $4.1 trillion of money in globally in digital wallets. A lot of that money is outside the United States. If we could tokenize a ETF, digitize that ETF, we could have investors who are just beginning to invest in markets through, let's say, crypto. They're investing in it, but now we could get them into the more traditional long-term retirement products. So we look at that as the next wave of opportunity for BlackRock over the next tens of years, as we start moving away from traditional financial assets by repotting them in a digital manner, and then having people stay in that digital ecosystem. Mm-hmm. They can have their cash, and we have the largest cash money market fund that's tokenized called BITL. Our Bitcoin IBIT is now over $100 billion.
I know, from nothing not that long ago.
And 2 years ago, zero.
Yeah,
so
I know. Well, you weren't always a huge proponent of crypto, as we know. Love it now.
But I grow and learn.
I heard you say that on 60 Minutes.
I did.
Yeah.
So here you saw Larry Fink talking about the massive opportunity ahead for international investment dollars flowing into crypto through tokenization. And like I said before, that is going to happen on the Ethereum ecosystem. So that's massively bullish for Ethereum. And of course, if it's bullish for Ethereum, it is by proxy bullish for an Ethereum treasury company like BMNR. And of course, Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. BlackRock just dumped $180 million in Bitcoin and rotated into 12,000 Ethereum. The rotation is still going. So BlackRock is a big proponent of Ethereum. You see Cathie Wood's ARK Invest here bought an additional 82,000 shares of bitmine immersion, now owning over 6.74 million shares of BMNR. $362 million bet on the world's largest Ethereum treasury company. And we're going to talk about Cathie Wood and ARK Invest because Tom Lee just went on their podcast, but it's very clear that a lot of funds are accumulating here. Now, Tom Lee made this post. He says, hey, look, I understand why markets are wary, and he's talking about equities markets here. There's US and China tension. There's major deleveraging last week. But he said that, hey, look, October is a month where we tend to see explosions. Sentiment is negative. Only 22% of fund managers are beating the benchmark, and a lot of them are going to chase. And he says, buy the effing dip is basically his financial advice here. And he was also on CNBC Closing Bell saying that he still sees the S&P 500 reaching 7,000 or higher by the end of the year. So he's still bullish on the markets, and he still thinks that this rally has legs to continue, which means that more money is risk on, and that's obviously going to be helpful for equities, but also BMNR. You see Ethereum here has recorded the largest stablecoin supply inflows in the past 24 hours, adding 775 million. Of course, Bitcoin is not on this table, so Ethereum is the biggest crypto. And in fact, Tom Lee had this entire 16-minute keynote where he explained the entire thesis around BMNR. And I wish we could listen to this entire thing together, but it's going to be a massively long video if we just react to this. The highlights here is that Wall Street is rebuilding itself, that it's going to happen on the Ethereum ecosystem. Stablecoins are going to be a big boon. Tokenized assets, like we saw Larry Fink talking about, AI, IP, real estate, credit is all going to be flowing into Ethereum, the ecosystem. And the targets that he has for Ethereum is absolutely staggering. 22,000 per one Ethereum, 62,000 per one Ethereum over the long term. That's like more than a 10x from where we're trading right now over that long-term target. Bitmine's Ethereum per share is up 9x in 9 weeks. The next Wall Street boom is going to be on chain. And if you haven't seen this already, I highly recommend you watch this full video. It's a full keynote presentation by Tom Lee himself talking about Bitmine. And these types of presentations are super important because this man has so many connections on Wall Street. And he is that spokesperson, not only for BMNR itself, but also for Ethereum as an ecosystem. He's really the person that's leading the charge on the adoption of Ethereum, right? So that's going to be very, very bullish. Now, there was this report. New data confirms Ethereum is the #1 ecosystem for developers. So you can see here the top 10 ecosystems by new developers in 2025. And Ethereum ranks higher than Solana, higher than Bitcoin, higher than Polygon, higher than all of these other ecosystems, right? You can see here that by a wide margin, developers that are new to crypto prefer the Ethereum ecosystem. You can see the trend lines here of how Ethereum is going relative to Solana and Bitcoin. In 2025, Ethereum is still home to the largest active developers of any blockchain out there. So this was some research that was done by Electric Capital around new developers who just made their first ever commits in that ecosystem in 2025. So you're seeing developer adoption on Ethereum. And of course, as you have developer adoption and you have institutional adoption, then you're going to see a massive wave of Ethereum. Here you have the former CEO and the chair of TD Ameritrade. This is what he had to say about Ethereum.
The people that grew up in the Web3 world and the DeFi world really are on top of their game. But it's a lot of people in traditional finance world that still tend to struggle with this a little bit. So if you think about where the future is, 5 years from now, there's not going to be a stock, there's not going to be an option, there's not going to be a mutual fund, ETF, anything that's not in effect tokenized. Stablecoins. 5 years ago, nobody heard about stablecoins. Today, we've got about $280 billion market. And Secretary Bessent had said that two years from now, we'll probably have a $2 trillion market. Ethereum is about 60% of that. So Ethereum's got its own blockchain, and it's got programmable smart contracts that in effect can do really complex financial institutional type transactions, especially overseas, that can be done almost instantaneously today, and that's going to be the way of the future. So 5 years from now, the market that we know it today, the exchanges, 24/7 markets and settlement, et cetera, that's going to be the way of the future. And I'm not sure traditional finance has necessarily quite accepted that yet.
I listened to this clip several times because that is one of the most glowing reviews of Ethereum and is one of the most bullish sentiments out there, especially considering who it's coming from. The former CEO and the chair of TD Ameritrade is saying these things around Ethereum, saying that it's going to be the only game in town. Ethereum is taking over Wall Street, and really it's backed by tokenization. It's backed by things like this developer environment that you're seeing. It's backed by this. The transactions per second keep hitting all-time highs. Ethereum is on pace to hit over 1 million transactions per second by 2031 here, of course, on the back of those layer twos. So you're seeing this massive adoption. And in fact, you had Tom Lee himself talking about why you're seeing this adoption. He was on the ARK Invest podcast here, and this is going to be a longer clip, but I want to play it anyways because this is super crucial to understanding the thesis of Ethereum. Because if you're bullish on the thesis of Ethereum, then BMNR is just the vehicle by which you transfer that value as a treasury company. It basically derives its value from the underlying Ethereum. So we're going to play this clip, and since it's a longer clip, I'm going to play it on 1.5x.
We have to think of Ethereum as the monetary base and the standard. So let's say I'm being really theoretical, in a quote world where the L2s pay 0 gas fees, okay, to the L1, which is not true. The fact that Ethereum is the monetary base would actually accrue value to it. It's the same reason someone's saying, hey, look, we trade stocks all day and it's quoted in dollars, but we don't pay the US dollar system to exist. We'd be right. The fact that NVIDIA trades in the US helps the dollar. So that's why even if there was no exchange between the two, it accrues value. But of course, we know that they're trying to fix that. And so L2s want to support L1s. And of course, in the future, any bank that is going to be building on the future of Ethereum is going to be staking Ethereum as well.
Yes. And I think the more layer twos that evolve, the more important the underlying becomes, right?
Imagine someone said, NVIDIA trades in America. It doesn't help the dollar. In fact, it helps the euro. We'd be like,
what?
Yeah.
I think that is a really good explanation, right? Because Ethereum is going to be this monetary base. It's going to be this basic ecosystem. And the layer twos on top of that are going to be building value off the back of that value proposition. I saw Chris here responding to this clip saying it's similar to Windows and the software ecosystem built on top of it. As more third-party software was built for Windows, the ecosystem gained market share dominance. Once Windows became the near default standard, Microsoft's value kept growing because both consumers as well as developers, which we saw the developer adoption of Ethereum, were effectively compelled to use it to achieve broad adoption. Likewise, while the layer 2s collect significant fees, a portion of those fees flow back to the Ethereum layer 1. The more that's built on L2s and the more they're used, the more the total fees are generated, including for L1. So there's this flywheel that's going on. The overarching goal for Ethereum L1 is market share dominance, and with it, more value. So as you're seeing more adoption of Ethereum, you're going to see a higher value for BMNR. And in fact, we are seeing every single week more adoption of Ethereum. I saw here Spar, the world's largest food retailer, now accepts Ethereum. And I don't know if Spar is in the US, it's definitely not in Canada. But if you ever go to Europe, you're going to see Spar everywhere. PayPal integrated Ethereum payments. Alipay becomes an L2 on Ethereum with 1.3 billion users on Alipay. So that's massive. Polymarket is coming to MetaMask. And MetaMask, of course, is the world's leading crypto wallet, which is based in Ethereum. And as all of this happens, of course, BMNR is going to benefit. Here you can see a massive accumulation of Ethereum from BitMine. This was on October 15th. Over the past 7 hours, 3 new wallets received 104,000 Ethereum worth $417 million. Despite the crypto market crash, Tom Lee still predicts ETH is going to hit $10,000 per ETH by year end. So BitMine is still actively acquiring Ethereum at a high pace. And of course, the price of BitMine right now is under pressure, but as the price of Ethereum goes up, then so too does the price of BitMine, because BitMine, BMNR, is a vehicle that carries that Ethereum. So here you can see the bull base and bear case by this user saying if Ethereum goes up to 10K, which is where Tom Lee expects it to go, BitMine can go 140 to 240 plus. And of course, it all scales down from that depending on what the underlying value of the asset is. Here, Tom Lee explains the differentiation of Ethereum relative to SBET. And this is a 2-minute clip, so I definitely won't play the full thing, but they basically talk about their balance sheet. They talk about Wall Street adoption. They talk about how it's going to be very liquid and one of the most traded stocks to attract institutional investors. And that really, it is the only vehicle for that institutional adoption in Ethereum. I'm seeing this dark pool prints on BMNR, $200 million plus at $51 per share. People are buying BMNR. I see coverage on BMNR. So here I saw this B. Riley analyst initiating coverage on BitMine with a buy rating of $90 per share. Of course, Peter Thiel has a stake in BitMine. And it's interesting here because the valuations are going to vary depending on what premium you want to put on BitMine relative to their net asset value. But of course, that net asset value keeps going up every single week. And this is what Tom Lee has to say about it.
Because at the start of this process, there was about $4 of Ethereum per share. That's when the announced transaction happened, and the stock price of BitMine was $450. And on August 27th, which was the last update, so we're due for a new update, the stock had Ethereum per share of $39. So almost a 9 times increase, almost 10 times increase in those 8 weeks. We have since increased it again in the past 4 weeks, but the company is working hard to make sure that every BitMine share has more Ethereum every day.
So this is the main point, is the Ethereum per share is increasing at a high clip. This is why BitMine purchases Ethereum on a weekly basis. BMNR now holds over 3 million Ethereum with total crypto and cash holdings of 12.9 billion as of October 14th, just 3 days ago. Every BitMine share has more Ethereum every day. So as they're accumulating more and more, and as the value of the underlying Ethereum rises as a result of that adoption, you're going to see a massive accumulation in price, or the fair value, let's say, of what BMNR should be trading at. And that's the core thesis. And I'll end on this. Michael Saylor broke down one of the core differentiators for BitMine. I'll play this, but he basically advocated for Tom Lee as a spokesperson. And this was one of the main things that I said was a differentiator for why you should buy BitMine over anything else, was as a result of having Tom Lee as a spokesperson. So here's Michael Saylor talking about Tom Lee.
The second thing that happened was the copying of that business model, and you now see emergent digital asset treasury companies. There are about 10 Ethereum treasury companies, public companies holding Ethereum, the most well-known being Bitminer, Immersion, led by Tom Lee. Tom Lee has emerged as probably the most visible, influential spokesperson in the entire Ethereum ecosystem in a matter of months, maybe a matter of weeks. What does that represent? Well, first of all, they have $10 billion of capital. Second of all, Tom Lee is part of the Wall Street establishment. He was never part of the crypto establishment. You saw Wall Street merges with the crypto economy, capital flows because it trusts Tom Lee. And then the next thing you know, you have Tom Lee having conversations with the early Ethereum entrepreneurs, with the Vitaliks of the world, or, and the like. And what's interesting there is that entire movement becomes commercialized, institutionalized, legitimized, rationalized, becomes a bit older, a bit more credible. And there's 10 other companies that copy. And now what you see is a conversion of the crypto idea of foundations. It used to be, it was like Ethereum Foundation in Switzerland, or Solana Foundation in Switzerland, or Cardano Foundation, all these foundations in Switzerland, because they could not legitimately start a company. And now those foundations will become companies. Those companies will become public. Those public companies have corporate governance, have boards of directors, have civil and criminal liability for their action. They are onshore. They are answerable to traditional structures in Wall Street. And that is going to change the nature of everything that happens in that industry quite a bit.
This is super important here, what Michael Saylor said, saying Tom Lee is one of the most influential people, possibly the most influential people that has emerged in the Ethereum ecosystem in the past couple of months. And that as a result of all these inflows from institutions, there's going to be more legitimacy around the vehicles that are introduced in that Ethereum ecosystem. There's going to be more digital asset treasury companies. Like we saw with this news here, it's going to become more prevalent. And it's going to be very important because BMNR is, of course, the largest Ethereum treasury company out there, led by Tom Lee. This post says it's kind of funny that Michael Saylor, of all people, can see clearly what many people still cannot see about Ethereum. It is getting legitimized in a way most people never thought it would be possible, and it's going mainstream, and Wall Street is all in, including Tom Lee. Welcome to the birth of the new global financial internet and settlement layer on Ethereum. This is very important because this is the fundamental thesis for Ethereum, and as a result, the fundamental thesis for BMNR. The last thing I'll end on, because this video is absolutely way too long, there's a lot of news, like I said, about BMNR. This is what gets me excited, is the technical patterns. You're seeing this trend line here tightening. And as we know, the contraction of these trend lines generally will lead to some strong moves from a technical perspective. And on a multi-year time frame, you can also see these patterns that sort of support that thesis that Ethereum is due for a big run. Of course, you have seasonal trends as well. You can see a repetition here in the patterns around the 2016 and the 2017 fractals that could potentially also play out in a big way in an explosive breakout in 2025. Anyways, that is so much content, and I really want to share these videos on a weekly basis because I think Ethereum and BMNR are going to warrant videos like this. And the most important thing, I think, in this entire video is, as you heard all these, me explaining week in and week out the bull thesis, keep in mind that this is down 18% in the past month. If you think you're too late or you missed the boat or anything like this, there is still so much opportunity here. It is still so early in the game, especially because we're now seeing Wall Street for the very first time actually be all in on this blockchain of choice, on this ecosystem of choice. And I think there's a lot of bullishness ahead. Bitmine remains 5% of my portfolio. I have positions in leaps. I have positions in option sales. I have positions in actual shares. And then obviously I have spreads as well on Bitmine. I have 2027 spreads. If you enjoy these videos, if you're a Bitmine shareholder, or if you're interested in Ethereum and you want to see more of this content, please let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the video so you can see more and you can be notified when I post. And let me know if I should make a weekly BMNR news recap video like this one. This one took quite a while to put together. And so if you do enjoy it, please share this out. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.